this could be an entire interview. So, I mean, of course, we can keep it brief, and maybe we can have you back another time to talk about this. But one of our patrons asked about socialism with Chinese characteristics and said, from your experience on working with the Chinese government and other education systems, do you see the political will from the Xi Jinping administration to keep toward on the socialist path? Or do you feel that China is having a new battle with capitalist and financialized forces within the system since Deng Xiaoping's reforms?
Well, in the late 19th century, everyone viewed socialism as the more efficient evolution of industrial capitalism. So I don't think it helps to say whether China is socialist or capitalist. Is the famous phrase, I think from Deng, went, white cat, black cat, it doesn't matter as long as it catches mice. I think the Chinese are sort of in the process continually of reinventing their economy, of seeing what works and what doesn't. I think they're operating on a pragmatic ad hoc basis, and that pragmatism doesn't lead them to think, is this capitalist or socialist? They don't think in terms of a abstract generality. They think very specifically, does this particular industry help develop China or not? Is it part of our overall long-term plan for 1925, 2025, 2030 and beyond? How does this fit into developing the economic structure of our economy to make it more practical? So I don't think labels really help in this at all. They present themselves as a Marxist country, but Marx didn't talk about the kind of problems that they're handling now. And is one of my fellow professors at the Peking University said, Marxism is the Chinese word for politics. And they're political, they're pragmatic, and you should think really in terms of what are they doing structurally, and not thinking what label, especially what Western label, are we going to print or paste on what they're doing. Labels don't help. You actually have to get into the nitty-gritty of looking at how they're handling tax policy, how they're handling land ownership and credit policy, how they're handling the budget deficits of rural communities. These are the problems that they're dealing with right now.
Yeah, Professor Hudson, the argument that you're making here, which I've seen very few people make, is, I mean, I think it's a correct argument, but it's interesting because it contradicts this claim that we've seen from even a lot of people on the left who argue that the new Cold War conflict, or in general, just the conflict between Washington and Beijing, is not a clash of systems. Rather, their argument is that China is yet another capitalist power, and it's an inter-capitalist rivalry similar to the rivalry that led to World War I, and that China and the U.S. have very similar economic systems. But you're arguing, in fact, the exact opposite. And I just want to read a really brief part of this column that you published at your website, Michael-Hudson.com. It's called America's Neoliberal Financialization Policy versus China's Industrial Socialism. And you have an interesting quote here from a U.S. government advisor for the Reagan administration, Clyde Prestowitz, who wrote kind of complaining, saying that China's economy is incompatible with the main premises of the global economic system embodied today in the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and a long list of other free trade agreements. These pacts assume that economies that are primarily market-based, with the role of the state circumscribed and microeconomic decisions largely left to private interests operating under a rule of law. The system never anticipated an economy like China, in which state-owned enterprises account for 1/3 of production. The fusion of the civilian economy with the strategic military economy is a government necessity. 5-year economic plans guide investment to targeted sectors. An internally dominant political party names CEOs of 1/3 or more major corporations and has established party cells in every significant company. The value of the currency is managed, et cetera, et cetera. And international is subject to being weaponized at any moment for strategic ends. Now, in your column, you pointed out how this is actually a pretty funny comment coming from a U.S. trade advisor, because some of those same things that the U.S. is accusing China of, like namely weaponizing international trade or fusing the civilian economy with the military economy. Of course, Washington embodies that really better than any other country in the world. But he is confirming that the point that you argued is correct. His complaint was that China still has state-owned enterprises accounting for 1/3 of production, and that the Communist Party of China still guides the economy. And in old school terms, going back to Lenin, they would say controls the commanding heights of the economy. So do you think that when people on the left in the US and other countries argue that this is all just a rivalry, an inter-capitalist rivalry between the capitalist class in China and the capitalist class in the United States, what do you think of that argument?
Well, I spend a great deal of time in China, and I've been professorships at a number of universities there. It is fundamentally different from the United States. You may have noticed in the last month China's move against Jack Ma, who was developing his information technology system into a credit system. They knocked him down, stopped the issue of new shares, the IPO, and said only the government can keep finance and credit in as a public utility. Now, what Prestovitz called state-owned enterprises used to be called public utilities in the United States. And in Europe, most public utilities were government-owned, like the national health system. In the United States, it broke away from that government direct ownership and management of many public utilities, but the electric utilities, the gas utilities, almost all public utilities providing natural monopoly services were regulated. Now they've been deregulated. In the last 40 years, you have almost no regulation at all. So China has, by keeping public utilities in the public domain, that means that these are not vehicles for rent extraction. That is, for charging monopoly rents, such as we pay in New York for cable services, such as Americans pay for the internet, such as Americans pay for public health, such as Americans pay for education. China provides free education. China provides, and Russia, basically free public health. Unfortunately, Russian public health means giving you an aspirin if you have a problem, but at least it's not privatized. So the United States is a rentier economy, and when left-wingers talk about, or people who call themselves left-wingers, they're really not left-wingers at all. They're, I don't know what, post-left. Very few people who call themselves left-wingers distinguish between industrial capitalism and finance capitalism. Well, that's the distinguishing feature of the last century. Ever since World War I, there's been a movement away from industrial capitalism towards financialization of the economies, towards finance capitalism based on a merger between the financial sector and the rent extraction sector, mainly the fire sector, finance, insurance, and real estate, and also the natural monopolies, where the banks have taken the lead in organizing trusts and organizing monopolies. And so the basis of most bank credit in the United States is to provide the ownership of companies or monopoly rights. Now, China doesn't make loans for these things. The People's Bank of China is the central bank. And the central bank doesn't create credit for corporate takeovers. It doesn't create credit for speculation. It doesn't provide an economy that enriches itself off economic rents and exploitation. But obviously, there are many successful billionaires in China, many successful entrepreneurs. But these are largely industrial entrepreneurs who've actually created something. China managed to avoid the Russian Stalinist micromanagement that blocked any kind of market feedback or any kind of spontaneous innovation. China let 100 flowers bloom. It let innovation take place. It let individuals get rich off innovation as long as they conducted their business and production and wealth in the public interest, defined as uplifting the quality of labor and contributing to the economy's long-term growth. Well, finance capitalism, such as we have in the US, doesn't live in the long run. Its time frame is short-term, 1 quarter at most, 3 months. And the time frame is how can we increase the price of our stock so that we can sell out and jump out of the sinking boat when the time comes. They're not concerned with making the economy richer. They're not concerned with making their labor force happier, better paid, or with a better standard of living, or even getting long-term pensions, which have been replaced by defined contribution plans instead of defined benefit plans. It's basically an exploitative system, and China's whole management system, although it's centrally managed, you need a strong state in order to prevent an independent rentier class, an independent financial class from emerging and doing to modern economies what it did to the Byzantine Empire and tried to do in the Bronze Age Near East, take over the government. China does not want a rentier class to do what they've done in the United States and make America into a centrally planned economy. We're now more of a centrally planned economy than Nazi Germany was. But the centrally planned economy is in Wall Street, in the financial system, not the government. So when the Biden and Blinken talk about a free market, they mean a market centrally planned by the financial sector with the government and elected officials not having any role to play except to decide whether they want to vote for the Democratic or Republican sponsors and backers of the rentier interests.